Estonia, a small European democracy along the Russian border, an American ally, and a country that hadn't seen political violence once in its modern history. Not until April 26, 2007.
We live quite near to the main event with my husband and my oldest child. When I went home, I saw some people there, and I was pretty scared. My husband was ready to protect our family then at the night.
And they're chanting Russia.
Yeah, they're shouting Russia, Russia, Russia.
Do you think that this was spontaneous, or do you think this was being encouraged?
No, this wasn't spontaneous, because a couple of days before, lots of people came from Russia to Estonia. But nobody knew it's going to be that massive. Nobody knew.
In 2007, Vladimir Putin's government interfered in Estonian politics, stoking unrest, mounting cyber attacks, trying to disrupt the government. Any of this sound familiar?
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. So, as it says, it's about a lot more than election interference. And what we'd like to do today, Joe and I, is to talk about the leveraging of technology to wage war on the democracies of the world. Okay? I'll begin by providing a brief scene setter, hopefully to provide a historical context for what we're experiencing today. Joe will then take a deep dive into the 2016 election and is probably going to also talk about what may be in store for the future. And then finally, we'd like to just discuss a little bit, throw out a couple ideas of what can be done. To begin, I'd like to mention a phrase that most of us have probably heard at one time or another. Democracy has within itself the seeds of its own destruction. Okay? Now, throughout history, warfare has not always been conducted on a purely military basis. For example, we all remember Ho Chi Minh. Back in 1957, a couple of years after the conclusion of what's known as the First Indochina War, he said the war for Indochina was not won or lost on battlefields of Indochina, it was won in Paris. A few years later, as we were gearing up for the support of the Republic of South Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh said, the war for Vietnam will not be won or lost in the battlefields of Vietnam, it will be won or lost in Washington. Continuing for a moment along the Vietnam line, Colonel Harry Summers was our chief negotiator at the four-party joint military team, which in the early to mid-70s basically was a group that was formed to address the issue of casualty resolution, POW MIA issues. And there's a famous conversation. Harry said to his North Vietnamese counterpart, Colonel Du, you know you never beat us in the battlefield. And Colonel Du said, maybe so, but it's also irrelevant. Okay. The end result and proof of the effectiveness of the North Vietnamese approach was codified in this now famous short dialogue. Bringing it up to date, though, this is from an article that was in the New York Times back on September 6th of this year. In the past, wars were conducted with weapons. Now it's through social media. The person who said that was a trainer who worked for a company called New Waves. Now, New Waves is mostly made up of retired Egyptian military officers, and they do business out of a housing project on that Egyptian military base. And what they do is they wage internet warfare. They conduct media campaigns that, not coincidentally, mirror the policy objectives of countries like Egypt and the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Now, what this tells us is that even small actors can get in on the action of social media interference and have an effect. So that's where we are today. So how did we get there? Okay. Now, this is my assessment. There's other ways of looking at this too. But when the United States conducted Desert Storm, it was in 1991, we did something that really shocked a lot of the world. And Desert Storm basically codified to the rest of the world that we were indeed the only superpower left in the world. And Desert Storm was conducted with great swiftness and effectiveness, both at the joint level and the combined arms level. And by jointness, I mean all the services of the U.S. military participated in a very coordinated fashion, but the combined was all the allies also were full participants. And in some ways, and just a little aside, it was so effective. Does anybody want to take a guess what percentage of the bill for all of Desert Storm was paid by the U.S.? Any ideas? 10%. 10%. The other 90% was picked up by the Arab states, particularly the Saudis. So it's amazing. Okay. Going back to the New York Times video we showed in 2007, this was showing how the Russians at that time were looking and probing how do they challenge the world's only superpower. And it took them a while. It took them a while for a number of reasons. Mr. Yeltsin was president at the time, and Mr. Yeltsin had some rather severe personal problems like drunkenness. And it took them a while to catch the scent. But by 2007, when the attack came on Estonia, they were catching the scent. Now, that scent was codified in this, the Gerasimov Doctrine. And this is General Valery Gerasimov. He is was the chief of the Russian General Staff, which is about the rough equivalent of our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And in 2013, February 2013, he wrote a 2,000-word essay that became known as the Gerasimov Doctrine. And it was published in a trade magazine called The title of the article is The Value of Science is in the Foresight. And it's a very telling statement there. But to put it in a slightly different perspective, there was an excellent article in the September-October 2017 edition of Political Magazine. And I'll read you one paragraph out of that article, which really tells it all about the Gerasimov doctrine. This article, that one, is considered by many to be the most useful articulation of Russia's modern strategy, a vision of total warfare that places politics and war within the same spectrum of activities, philosophically and logistically. The approach is guerrilla and waged on all fronts with a range of actors and tools, for example, hackers, media, businessmen, leaks, and yes, fake news, as well as conventional and asymmetric military means. Thanks to the internet and social media, the kinds of operations Soviet PSYOPs teams once could only fantasize about, the upending of domestic affairs of nations with the information alone, are now plausible. The Gerasimov document builds a framework for those new tools and declares that non-military tactics are not auxiliary to the use of force, but the preferred way to win. They are, in fact, the actual war. Chaos is a strategy the Kremlin pursues. Gerasimov specifies that the objective is to achieve an environment of permanent unrest and conflict within an enemy state. And for me, that pretty much sums it up. The nature of war in the 20th century with regard to the way the U.S. military conducts it. The last time we actually had a congressional declaration of war was the day after Pearl Harbor. Okay? And everything since has been by congressional resolution. Korean War was a UN police action. And actually, technically, we're still at war. The UN, is still at war with North Korea because what has been signed is only an armistice. Okay? 40,000 U.S. servicemen died in Korea. Then 1964 rolls along, and we have the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, where Lyndon Johnson goes to Congress and asks for a resolution to basically move the U.S. military from an advisory-based role into active combat against the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. And then a few months later, of course, March of 1965, the Marines landed at Da Nang and basically took over the combat role of pursuing the war in Vietnam. Then we have today, more recent things, Desert Storm, which I spoke about, Afghanistan and Iraq, which are also based on congressional resolutions, carry on and on. Next one. So war in the 21st century. Okay, we have a mix. Conventional, asymmetric, or hybrid warfare, as Gerasimov refers to it. But we're seeing an increase on things like cyber information operations and social media. And at that point, I'd like to remind you of what I said earlier, the old saying about democracy has within it the seeds of its own destruction. And our democracy is our strength, but at the same time, it's our weak spot. Or as Winston Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government except all the others. So I would leave you with a question, okay? If someone wages war against us, are we at war? Even if there is no congressional declaration or resolution. In other words, if Russia is waging war against us in cyberspace and social media, we're at war, okay? And with that, Joe, it's yours.
Let me begin where the appointment order begins, and that is interference in the 2016 presidential election. As alleged by the grand jury in an indictment, Russian intelligence officers who were part of the Russian military launched a concerted attack on our political system. The indictment alleges that they used sophisticated cyber techniques to hack into computers and networks used by the Clinton campaign. They stole private information and then released that information through fake online identities and through the organization WikiLeaks. The releases were designed and timed to interfere with our election and to damage a presidential candidate. And at the same time, as the grand jury alleged in a separate indictment, a private Russian entity engaged in a social media operation where Russian citizens posed as Americans in order to influence an election. These indictments contain allegations, and we are not commenting on the guilt or the innocence of any specific defendant. Every defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. The indictments allege, and the other activities in our report describe, efforts to interfere in our political system. They needed to be investigated and understood, and that is among the reasons why the Department of Justice established our office. And I will close by reiterating the central allegation of our indictments, that there were multiple, systematic efforts to interfere in our election. And that allegation deserves the attention of every American. Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
I want to talk about Russian interference in our election of 2016. There's several things to keep in mind. Number one, as Dennis has pointed out, the nature of warfare has changed. We old soldiers like to talk about tanks on the plains of Europe and defending the Fulda Gap. That ain't going to happen. Warfare today is warfare aimed at a nation's will and at that nation's unity and cohesiveness. No longer are we going to be dropping bombs on each other. This is an assessment that was rendered by the United States intelligence community in January of 2017 that has to do with Russian attacks on our election in 2016. We use a term up here, the intelligence community. Everybody knows that there is a CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, that there is NSA, which stands for no such agency, the National Security Agency that breaks codes and protects codes and listens in on communications and that kind of thing. The Defense Department has a Defense Intelligence Agency. Each of the military services has their own intel arms. The State Department has the State Bureau of Intelligence and Research.
INR, yeah.
Commerce, Treasury, all have similar organizations whose job is to dig out information from foreign powers in their specific area of expertise. And the U.S. intelligence community consists of 17 different agencies, and never, ever do they all agree, except this one time. This was the U.S. intelligence community assessment that all 17 agencies signed up on. And you see it right there, demonstrated a significant escalation in their directness and in their level of activity. We assess that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered this, an influence campaign aimed at our presidential election. And you'll notice that we assess that Russia's goals were one long-term and two short-term. The long-term goal was to undermine public faith in our democratic process. The short-term goal was to interfere in that specific election. Now, this is something that I don't know if any of the audience has the background in the old intel community that Dennis and I have, but this is very important. As I was reading this intel community assessment, that hopped out at me. We have high confidence in these judgments. When intel people write documents and assessments and estimates, we always sort of fudge it a little bit because you never know exactly what's on the enemy's mind. But when you have the 17 agencies saying, we have high confidence in these judgments, what that means is, this is no nonsense. We're not kidding. This is for real. And the final assessment was this. We assess that they will apply the lessons they have learned from 2016 going forward to further influence U.S. efforts worldwide against U.S. allies and their election process, as well as ours. So we're not the only people who are being targeted by Russian intelligence. Who did this in 2016? It was ordered by Mr. Putin. It was conducted, and this is interesting enough, it was conducted by the Russian military intelligence services, not by their civilian spooks, by the GRU, the Russian military intelligence. That building there is their headquarters in St. Petersburg, Russia. We know exactly where it is. We know who works there. Mr. Mueller indicted, 13 of the folks who worked there. And it is known as the Internet Research Agency, located in St. Petersburg, Russia. We can go back to 2004 and document attacks not only on us, but on elections in 26 other countries carried out by these folks. And what did they do? They did two things. Number one, they conducted direct attacks on election systems and on political parties. They directly attacked electoral systems in all 50 states. Most of these were our systems having to do with voter registration and maintaining voter registration lists. They also directly attacked the computer systems used by the Democratic National Committee, and because there were some real holes in their security, they were able to get in there very well. So direct attacks. Second thing they did was influence operations. And this really was the more important one. The influence operations to spread false and misleading information to sow discord. And they did this in a number of ways. You'll hear the term, if you're spending time on the internet, you'll hear the term trolls or troll farms. when you go fishing and trolling, you bait your hook, you throw it out there, and you putt along, and you drag your bait along through the water, and somebody's going to bite on it. That's what an internet troll is. An internet troll throws out something. It can be an invitation to a porn site. It can be political information. But they're trolling it along, knowing that somebody is going to bite on it. And once you bite, then they'll pull you in much more deeply. Now, I'm going to talk about this later on here in a minute. Data is now the new nuclear weapon. There is data, there's information, very detailed information about every one of us who spends any time on the internet specifically. And that's not the problem. But the problem is now that we have developed computer systems and computer applications that use artificial intelligence that mimics human thought processes, but does it so much faster and in such greater detail than you and I can do it. So that now data is now being manipulated by artificial intelligence to target individual people or individual groups, and that targeting can then be carried out by internet bots or robots. You just turn it loose, and the computer system itself does the work. The troll farms, we know that the Internet Research Agency hired several hundred Russian folks who have fairly good English language capability, and they would sit down and work basically in what amounts to a call center, and they would generate phony Facebook pages or Twitter accounts, and then spread information intended to influence the election. Speaking of this data, let's remember that everybody's good friend Paul Ford took polling data that the Trump campaign was using from 7 states and provided them to Konstantin Kalimnik, a Russian closely associated with Mr. Putin, and who's also closely associated with Russian military intelligence. Manafort gave this data to Kalimnik. Trump won the Electoral College. I think everybody's aware of the fact that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote with 3 million votes. Trump won the Electoral College, and he won the Electoral College on the virtue of 77,000 votes in 3 states. Data from those 3 states was provided by Manafort to the Internet Research Agency, or to the IRA through Kalimnik. Okay, direct attacks. Attacked electoral systems in all 50 states. Most of these were hacking attacks trying to get into our voter registration databases. And the problem here is this. The problem that they faced is this. You got 50 states, and every state has different ways of registering their votes. So it's going to be very difficult for them to do anything nationwide, but they can do it in specific states. And then when you look at the status of our political posture today, you've got the red states that are going to always vote Republican, you've got the blue states that are going to always vote Democratic, and you've got a few swing states, so they don't need to go after everybody. You go after only the swing states. We don't have anything to suggest that there was anything done to manipulate vote totals. This has been turned upside down and inside out. We've looked at it at every different possibility, but there does not seem to have been any kind of attempt, to screw around with the voting totals. And if you stop and think about the way we report vote totals, they come in from the precinct to us in the registrar's office. We file them with the state. We very quickly look at what the state has. And if there's any differences, we're going to catch those, and thanks, Danny, we're going to catch those differences and correct them. And I think they know that, so they're not going to mess around with vote totals. But here's what they were trying to do. When you go in to vote, you walk up to the person who's running the poll book. The poll book used to be a physical book, several hundred pages with the names of everybody who's registered to vote. and you go in there and you show your ID, and we flip through there and we find you and we check you off as having voted. We now do it in a laptop computer. And here in Northumberland County, we're ditching our laptops and are going with iPads. These things are run by computer applications. There are about half a dozen companies in the country who produce these electronic poll book applications. We use one called Advocate that's done by a company out of Richmond. There's a company down in Florida called VR Systems that produces poll book software that has been used in North Carolina and Florida. Prior to the 2016 election, and nobody knew this until we found it much later on, there had been a hack that had entered the VR Systems software design computers. And apparently what they did was drop a virus into a few of those applications. So then, down in Durham, North Carolina, and in 6 counties in Florida, on election day, when they opened up their electronic poll books to start checking people in, they could not do it. The software went berserk. So now all of a sudden, you've got 150 people standing in line, you can't register anybody to vote, your polling place is shut down, the registrar's got to run up here with a big old printed poll book, and folks decide to heck with this and they walk away. What does this do to the confidence of the voters and the public in our systems? That's what it was there for. So when we say attacks on electoral systems, this is exactly what happened. Disrupt the process and cause people to have their doubts about the election systems and results. And this is not something that's down there in Florida and North Carolina. Right here at home in Northumberland County, in the past few years, we have had on the electoral board 2 folks approach us and say, you really don't count those absentee ballots, do you? You just take them and ditch them. Now, I don't know where that's coming from, but that's the kind of thing that destroys confidence in the system. And then, of course, there was a hack into the Democratic Party computer systems where they stole emails and campaign documents and threw them out for the whole world to see. And I think we'll all remember the day that Trump and his video about grabbing ladies appeared. 3 or 4 hours later, there was a huge dump of Hillary Clinton's emails on the internet, and everybody forgot about Trump. And so we have these, these direct attacks. Influence operations. Detailed data about each one of us is available, and I suspect every one of you has had this experience. I buy supplies for the rescue squad down here. We needed a specific type of battery, and I had to go on the internet and I Googled Lucas 2 battery, and I finally found one and bought it. 5 minutes later, every website I went to, a little ad popped up advertising the Lucas Physio Control and the manufacturer. We were looking for these long tail t-shirts that don't pull out of your back, and we searched, we Googled long tail t-shirts, and now I'm getting ads for long tail t-shirts. There is data about you. Google collects everything. Amazon collects everything. There is on Amazon every book you've ever bought and searched for. That data is available for sale. Now, certain corporations put great restrictions on what they will sell. Others put very little restriction. So if you've searched for it or done it on the internet, it's probably sitting in a database somewhere and is for sale to someone. Now, having all this data sitting around is not what's important. Well, it's important, but what now makes it critical is that artificial intelligence makes it possible for a computer system to manipulate this data the same way a human brain would do it, only much faster. And so, as we say, you can now micro-target individuals. What are you looking for? You are looking for blouses of a certain size with a certain design on them, and that's what you're going to get. That is available through all these internet databases where information is collected on us. The Internet Research Agency has this data. They bought it up. They applied artificial intelligence algorithms to sort it out, and then they went to their troll farms, where you've got all these several hundred young Russian folks who speak English, and said, all right, we want you to start setting up phony Facebook accounts, Twitter accounts, Instagram, and we want you to target these people. We know these folks over here are kind of on the fence and they're leaning toward Hillary, but we want to lean them back this way. We know these folks here appear to have made no decision. We know from the data that we've collected on these folks that they are very unhappy about immigration, about environmental regulations, about U.S. relations with NATO and that kind of thing. And so what happened now is the troll farms start putting up innocent-looking pages on Facebook. And here is one example. This is Melvin. Melvin is a friendly-looking guy. He lives in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and he's got a Facebook page. And if you look at Melvin's Facebook page, it really looks neat. That's Melvin's little girl. And that's Melvin over there with his hat on backward. And if you look right here, he says he's a graduate of this college and a graduate of that high school. And he's all about Melvin on his Facebook page. There's one catch to this. Melvin doesn't exist. The college has no record of him. The high school has no record of him. The town has no record of him. Melvin was created by a troll farm. The photos show Melvin in a restaurant in Brazil. And if you analyze, if you really look closely at the photographs, they were snatched off a Facebook page or newspaper ads from Brazil. Now, his Facebook postings, what do you put on Facebook? You put your grandchildren, you know, you put your trip to Italy, you do all this. No, Melvin didn't do all of that. All his Facebook postings were political. And then Melvin would friend folks on Facebook. He friended hundreds of people on Facebook. And then he would send them messages that said, you won't believe what I just read. You need to go check this out for yourself. And Melvin's Facebook page sent people to DC Leaks. What is DC Leaks? DC Leaks was a website that appeared in June of 2016, just before the election. We traced it back to a Russian operation that we've codenamed Fancy Bear. DC Leaks published the leaked documents from the Democratic National Committee. And then, after their work was done, they shut down. But Melvin was sending people to go visit DC Leaks. And there were thousands of these fake Melvins being generated by the Internet Research Agency troll farms in Russia, influencing voters. And this is just some examples of something. This is one right here that might take a little bit of explanation. The caption up here says, military asks, what difference does it make? I think you remember the attacks on the consulate in Benghazi, where our ambassador was killed and 3 other guys from the security forces were killed. And Hillary Clinton was questioned by Congress for 11 hours. And at some point, she said, what difference does this make whether those attacks on the consulate were generated by this or that? What we need to do now is get busy and make sure it doesn't happen again. However, Hillary's opponent seized on that comment, what difference does it make? And this is the kind of thing that Melvin was sending out to all his friends. And if you are undecided about for whom to vote, this is going to be very powerful. And this is the kind of stuff that they put together. Now, and if you stop and think about this, these are not ignorant people running these troll farms and doing these type of operations. This is very sophisticated. They know exactly what buttons to push and whose buttons to push and how to push them. So, if it's not about elections, what it's about. As we've shown here right now, I think we all understand that they can't compete with us economically. I forget what the numbers are, but if you take all the nations of the world and rank them in economic rank order, The Russians are way down here in the pack. Now, they control a lot of oil and a lot of natural gas. Most of the natural gas used in Europe comes out of Russia. But except for that, they are not economically very powerful at all. They cannot go toe-to-toe militarily with us, and so their only hope is to weaken us internally. Their goals within this country are, as you see right here, cause us to doubt our own system, to create and expand distrust and chaos, and to pit people against each other as if we needed any more of that. And then if you look internationally, the Russians look upon Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, the same way we look upon Central America. That's our playground, and we don't need anybody else in there. However, after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, the old Warsaw Pact countries, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, several of them have joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And Mr. Putin looks out and he sees what used to be an empire out here has shrunk and is right up on his borders. So what he's got to do is turn the European nations against him and sow discord between the United States and Europe, and in hopes, of course, of regaining some of his lost influence. Well, what can we do about it? There is no magic bullet. I'm not going to tell you step 1, 2, 3 what you can do about this. What this requires really is vigilance on all our parts. Just because you see it here, it's not necessarily true. You really got to dig behind the headlines, dig behind the footnotes, read several different sources, and make up your own mind. Something right here, what we call the mainstream media, the old ABC, NBC, CBS, the big major newspapers, we may have some problems with them, but the fact is there is still very serious and very professional journalism going on in this country. And it really deserves our support. If you don't subscribe to one of the mainstream newspapers, they could use your subscription, because we're seeing newspapers disappear all over the country. The networks, NBC, ABC, CBS, and PBS, Public Broadcasting Service, they really deserve our support, and I think you can rely on them to find factual information. Here are a couple of, here's some internet locations that have always done a good job of checking facts. Open Secrets is an interesting one, because everybody who runs for office has to file financial reports listing the names of their donors and the dollar amounts with the Federal Election Commission, and Open Secrets gets those documents because they are public information, and then Open Secrets lines them up. So if you want to know who in Kilmarnock, Virginia has been donating to Mr. Rob Whitman's campaign, you can go to Open Secrets, go to their section where you search for campaign donors, enter the zip code for Kilmarnock and the name Whitman, and it'll pop up and tell you everybody in Kilmarnock who has written the check to Mr. Whitman. But it is really more important than that, because these folks check a lot of the stuff that we see floating around today. Watch for these. Somebody will tell you, send this to everybody you know. I think we've all seen some of those, or save America from the socialist, and those kind of things. Those phrases will tend to give it away that either somebody has an objective in mind, and it may not be your next door neighbor. We can confront false information. When you see it on your Facebook, on Instagram, social media, please don't be reluctant to go after it. Letters to editors, the newspapers will tell you that the most popular pages on their papers are in fact the letters pages. Share what you read, share what you find out. Now, I realize that every one of these is a very small individual action. But that's what makes up a mass movement, is a lot of small individual actions, people taking responsible action for themselves and spreading the word to their neighbors. And let me see what else is left. Okay, that's it. That's all Dennis and I had to say. We'd like to hear comments, questions, suggestions.
Flip
Yes.
on the lights back there. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the lights.
Thank you.
And we got through it without a technology failure.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, it occurred to me when you were going through this, one thing you could do is don't accept any friend that you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You wouldn't let them in your door, why would you let them, you know?
Yeah. Exactly.
So, I understand that the goal of the food interference is disruption,
Mm-hmm.
creating chaos, and but to what end? And what's Putin's end game? Is it protective? He wants to make sure that Russia doesn't get overrun? Or is he planning to move in some way to expand his reach?
Well, you know, in a way, it's offensive, and in a way, it's defensive, okay? The thing that really set Putin off was, as Joe mentioned, the NATO thing, okay? Russians were starting to grind their molars when the old Eastern European, the Warsaw Pact states started joining up NATO after the Soviet Union fell. But what really drew the line for Putin was when the idea of the Ukraine joining NATO. That's where, you know, Crimea, he took military action. That was his red line, okay? In a longer, more traditional sense, and looking at Putin's own particular views and ego, Putin does not want to see, per se, the Soviet Union restored or anything like that. But he does have a sense of the grandeur of the Romanovs, let me put it that way, okay? He sees a place, a greater Russia. Now, Joe mentioned economically, Russia's way down there. Actually, it ranks right up there with the Netherlands, economically. And they're never going to be that much of an economic power. But he wants the kind of grandeur that the Romanovs, for example, once aspired to, Catherine the Great, Peter the Great. And that was the defensiveness they had about Western Europe, you know. That's why, you know, much of the court of the Romanovs was spoken in French. So it's a complex thing, but he's defensive, but yet there are lines in the sand for him.
So it's really, he's just as much of a narcissist as egomaniac as Trump.
Guess what?
Well, he's a lot smarter and has a lot more experience. Putin comes out of this, out of the Russian intelligence services.
Yeah.
And that's why he is where he is today.
In the back?
So recognizing that we're at war,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any confidence that the brains at our intelligence agencies are in developing a response, both offensive and defensive, to this? Can we take them on and beat them at their own game somehow?
Well, there are rumors unconfirmed. For example, we know that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. And in order to have a nuclear weapon, you have to have very, very high-grade enriched uranium, which you then turn into plutonium. And the way you do that is with these very expensive and very delicate centrifuges and separating. There are rumors that several thousand Iranian centrifuges went crazy and destroyed themselves because somebody at CIA slipped a bug in it. And the fact of the matter is, we are as good at this as they are.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
We got to be better.
Yeah. For my personal opinion, the quick answer to your question is, yes, we can if we're allowed to. Okay?
Well, you see that, yeah, and that's another thing. Denny and I both come from the intel organizations, and we can go up to the boss and say, hey, boss, this is what's going on. What do you recommend? Well, we recommend 3 or 4 or 5 courses of action. It is the folks who make the policy. At the end of the day, we got to salute and say, yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
We may not agree with it, but that's what we do.
Okay.
Is that what
In
happened
the
to
back.
failures in Russia?
My neighbor.
Yes, Dennis. I just have a comment. In a way that we're our own worst enemy, because the 5 biggest producers of big data are here in the US. People mentioned it. Facebook, Google, Amazon, whatever. The European Union has laws on privacy of individuals' data. We have nothing here.
Yeah.
So if we would start a campaign to say, bring in some sort of privacy laws analogous to the European ones, then we wouldn't allow the big companies to sell this information to China, to Russia,
Mhm.
to anybody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
So we can start by fixing our own house before we fix other people's.
Yeah,
If we just took a close look at what the EU is doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, yeah, yeah. Well, we've got Congress to get through, don't we? Okay, and Mr. McConnell. Yes, ma'am.
Well, the other thing I think we can do, about a year ago, I was hacked on my Facebook account. They were trying to mess with the people that I had on my list. And then, when I tried to get back into my account, I was locked out.
Ransom.
And so, then I had invitations from Facebook to come back on with a new account. And I decided, no,
Mhm.
I am not going back on, and I've been off for a year, and I haven't missed it a bit. So we could boycott and just everybody drop off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, maybe the wisest one amongst us all is Keith right here, who refuses to get a computer. Right?
That's right.
Do you have a Facebook account? Do you all use Facebook?
I have a Facebook account, but I only use it because of a retirement association, a retirement alumni association I'm a member of. And in order to get what they do, I have to get a Facebook account. I think it's a pain in the ass, but you know.
We don't have a Facebook account.
And never will.
We don't have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, any of that stuff.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that everything that Joe had up there about what the Russians did is in the Mueller report.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
it's right here.
It is
Oh, yeah.
fact. And there's rumors that the Russians did something similar on the Brexit issue. And look
Oh, yeah.
Look
Yeah.
what's
What a
happening
mess
in
they're
Greenland.
living
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a mess.
Yeah.
And I have a question. Do you guys know if we are planning social media attacks against other countries like Russia or China?
I wouldn't be surprised.
We have contingency plans for almost anything, I'll put it that way. Okay? Lori, you had a question?
Lori, this is the Mueller report, for those of you who don't have it, 400 and something pages. It's a wonderful cure for insomnia, but this is the section on election interference, and this is the section on the possibility of obstruction of justice. And this is what everybody pays attention to. The fact of the matter is, believe it or not, Mr. Trump's going to be gone. But these people are not disappearing. Okay? This is what everybody pays attention to. This is a disease of the skin. This is a cancer of the soul right here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by the way, you can, if you don't want to read the Mueller report, Audible has put that whole thing on Audible for free.
There's also a reading by a number of different celebrities. So
Oh, yeah.
you can watch it on video. It's a short, abridged, I think it's an hour long or so, hour and a half.
10 things.
You know, when it first came out, they were talking about how difficult it was to read. I'm an English major, and I read stuff in college that could absolutely put you stone dead. There was nothing difficult about that.
Okay.
There's no big words in there. The concepts are elementary. My grandson could understand. The thing is they thought if they put out a document, it was a lot of pages. You remember how you used to choose your book report? They counted the pages. So, you know, if you put out a lot of pages, then people won't read it and people will remain ignorant. Well, before Joe even read it, I read it. I said, I want to know what's going on. I want to know what they're lying about, what they're telling the truth about. And if this is the first step, I'll read that thing. And I did, and I divided it into sections, and like Joe said, you'll read it till you put yourself to sleep. When you can't remember that page, you stop for the night.
Yeah.
But I read the whole thing, and it is very factual. I think Mr. Mueller is a saint, I really do. And we don't know what he has given us. We really don't appreciate, down generations, you'll appreciate what he, I don't know how, I bet he probably doesn't even have a wife. But you know, having a home life is very difficult. You have to deal with
Maybe he's had several. Yeah. Okay. Lori, fine.
All right, Joe, you mentioned one example of an American cooperating in this process, and that was Manafort, who very specifically gave a very specific group of information to the Russian military. Now, in the Mueller report, there are other people who are believed to have cooperated, other Americans who are believed to have cooperated, such as Flynn, such as, I can't think of the other guy.
Well, you've got a whole raft of them. What led to Mueller was a counterintelligence investigation. Counterintelligence is we're catching their spies and they're catching our spies. A guy named Corey Lewandowski, working for the Trump campaign, was in a bar in London one night talking to some guys in the Australian embassy, and Corey had a little too much to drink, and he said, "Boy, you won't believe it. I work for the Trump campaign, and we're getting all kind of good stuff from the Russians that we're going to beat up Hillary about." Not those exact words, but that's what it amounted to. The Australian embassy official said, maybe the United States government wants to know about this. So they went back and talked to the legal attaché. Every one of our embassies has a position known as legal attaché. It's an FBI guy in there. And so the Australians talked to the legal attaché in the American embassy and said, this guy Lewandowski said blah, 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 blah. They reported that back to FBI headquarters. For a political campaign to get assistance from a foreign nation is a federal crime. And so the FBI opened an investigation into it. Now, you now want to know what Lewandowski is doing, but we cannot go tap the telephones of American citizens without a specific court order from a FISA court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, which is a group of judges appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So the FBI goes to the FISA court and says, this is what we've got. And the FISA court said, go get him. And so the Bureau started listening in on what Lewandowski was up to. And from that, they developed all these contacts that were coming into the Trump campaign. Now, you're all familiar with a thing called the Steele dossier.
Yeah.
Christopher Steele was a long-time experienced British spook. He had connections all over Europe.
Particularly in Russia.
Jeb Bush and little Marco Rubio, their campaigns got together and contacted an organization called, guy from the New York Times,
Fusion
GPS, which is an organization that helps political campaigns. Bush and Rubio went to this organization, Fusion GPS, and said, can you dig up some dirt on Trump for us? And so Fusion GPS went out to people that they knew, including Christopher Steele. And Steele said, I can get dirt on Trump from my contacts throughout Europe. And he started sending memos back. Eventually, this collection of memorandum became what we know as the Steele dossier. There have been 42 charges in the Steele dossier that says Donald Trump was doing this, doing that, doing another thing. 18 of those have been proven to be true. When time came to renew the FISA court warrant that was started because of Lewandowski running off at the mouth in the bar, the FBI then threw some things from the Steele dossier in there. This is why Republicans in Congress today say the FBI broke the law because they used these unfounded charges from this guy Steele to go to the FISA court. That's not what happened. The Mueller investigation started. with a counterintelligence investigation into Corey Lewandowski running off at the mouth in a bar in London, and it then expanded from there.
You're talking about the past. I want to know how you're going to stop in a second term for Trump.
But you got to do that at the, well, yeah.
That's gone.
Well,
We want to stop him from coming back for a second term.
well, we'll decide that on November the 3rd next year.
Yeah.
Well, that's my question. Will we? The reason being is politically, what happens? You know, we talked about all this interference in the campaign and everything else. What happens if during the 220 election, we find out that there's a lot of messing around? Not enough that we know a vote was changed, but just a whole bunch of doubt is spread that the fact of the matter is you got to throw out the election because it was bogus. Who's president then?
Well, it is going on right now. We've had these, CNN is sponsoring these Democratic debates. I think we had the third one last week.
Yeah.
During the Democratic debate, Twitter was lighted up with comments coming from known Russian troll farms about Joe Biden this, Kamala Harris that, Elizabeth Warren something else, Mayor Pete something else. Thereafter, it's all over the place. Now, your question is, what happens if we get the results back on election night and nobody believes it?
I mean, you just keep status quo until eventually.
Nobody knows.
We have no idea.
You have what's called a constitutional crisis.
But, ma'am, to answer your question, yes, that's exactly right. What we're talking about is what passed, but it's also going on right now, and you can guarantee, you know that what worked in 2016, they're going to do it again in 2020. They're doing it right now, which is why each of us has got to be very attentive and got to be very careful and make up our minds based on facts, not on some nonsense that we read on a Facebook page. And we've got to let our neighbors know that. Yes, ma'am.
I think to those points that were just made, we need to be aware that Brad Paschal, who's Trump's campaign manager, is a digital genius. He's making millions on a couple of companies that he owns on the side for consulting. And I hope that Virginia is prepared to deal with onslaught from that.
This brings up a point I'd like to just foot stomp a little bit about what we do as Virginians, okay? We've got an election coming up, and about 2 weeks ago, Bob Wilson and I had a discussion in the post office in Reedville, and he said something I thought was rather profound. He said, you know, in some respects, this coming election here, the 2019 election in Virginia, can be more important than the 2020 election, okay? Now, we got a guy, okay, Francis Edwards, who's running. What we need to do, in my opinion, is we need to make sure the Virginia electoral system is as secure as possible, okay, for the 2020. And that starts by getting people like Margaret Ransom out and Francis Edwards in. Joe.
This is the most succinct, informative session I've experienced with this. So I thank both you and Indivisible.
Thank you.
My recommendation for consideration is you obviously have made this into a documentary or you recorded it.
Well,
I would like to recommend that we consider sending a copy to every Indivisible so that it's not just us who are learning, but it's a number of them. And second goal would be to have the Indivisibles then try and share it themselves with the intent of trying to get it on ABC, NBC, the major news outlets. I think that the more we know is wonderful, but the more the world knows is better.
well, that's true.
And we need to spread that
Yeah.
information.
Well, I believe Lori was trying to invite Mark Warner.
I did invite Mark Warner, and I did invite Margaret Ranson, and I did invite Senator McDougal. I don't see them here though, but they were formally invited to this presentation. I also want everyone, while we're going through the next week or so, to pay careful attention to the sentencing of Michael Flynn. You will remember that when Michael Flynn first came up for sentencing, the judge asked the prosecutors, "Why am I not considering treason?" And he sent Mike Flynn back to the prosecutors to provide more information so that he could, in fact, not be charged with treason. And what happened is Michael Flynn did a turnaround and decided that maybe he was better off hoping for a pardon. And he has not cooperated further with the prosecutors. So it'll be very interesting to see if the treason word comes up in any of these prosecutions. Yeah. Because Denny, let me ask you, if you had done one of these things, or if Joe had done one of these things, where would you be?
Jail.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just want to add one more thing. It's going to get worse, unfortunately, because there's now software out that it's for video, and they doctor it to where you cannot tell.
Oh yeah, I've seen some of that stuff.
It's a process known as it's a process known as deep video, where you can take a normal video of a person and modify it so they're saying things they didn't say.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many of you all have seen this, but there was an example given of Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi.
She was saying something, and she stopped for a minute and said, and they have modified that, so if you look at it, you think she's done something. And you're going to see more and more of that. It's going to get a lot worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to know, are they unstoppable?
Well, and by stop, you mean a condition which they'll never do anything like this again? No. This is going to go on. It has gone on since the beginning of time. There has been conflict between and among nations, and it's going to continue.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do, is manage it to our advantage.
This method of attack.
Yeah.
It's not going to stop.
No, I think the point I was trying to make at the end of my presentation is we're at war, okay? Congress hasn't declared it, they haven't passed a resolution, but we're at war because somebody is waging war against us. And that's the first thing we've got to do, is recognize that. You know.
The other, I just add to that and say, the part of the problem is there are a lot of useful idiots on both sides of the political debate who amplify divisive comments that are initially made by bots. So, you know, because they like a particular candidate or, you know, one party or the other, if they see a negative post, they repeat it, they retweet it, and then they start using phrases like, make sure, you know, everybody that sees this retweet it. And these are not bots. These are people who just happen to favor one particular candidate or not like a particular candidate.
Ma'am, your question right back here again, how do we stop it? Let me remind everybody of something. Elections are won by turnout. Turnout does it. And I'm a Democrat. I know the Indivisible is not partisan. The Indivisible does not come out and support Democratic candidates or whatever. But we Democrats never vote except every 4 years. We crank out there and we vote for the president, which is why the Republican Party controls the legislatures in 37 states, the governorships in, 30 of those 37 states, and controls up until last year, controlled the Senate, because we do not vote until every 4th year, which makes it critical for us to get out and vote in Virginia. Now, I know a lot of us and are reluctant to talk politics with our friends and neighbors, but you know your friends, you know your neighbors. Try to feel them out and see if they're going to vote. Yeah. And if they're not voting, you got to encourage them to vote. Get out there and vote, unless, of course,
let me dovetail off that.
Get out there and vote.
Let me dovetail off that real quickly.
Make the difference.
Yeah, because here in the Northern Neck, Generally, people are very sensitive to what they say and offending people, okay? You know, you don't want to say it because, my gosh, he might be kin or something like that, so don't say a bad word against that guy. So what do? We've got to be more outspoken, you know. And I know we like to be very polite around here and everything like that, but there are some naked truths, folks.
I haven't noticed that politeness.
Well, you know.
Just two things, or actually three. If you Google media bias chart, there is can everyone hear me? Media bias chart just came out with their version 5.0, which is Zooms, so it's interactive and easier to use. And they have ranked from left to right and top to bottom. So at the very top of the curve are the very high data reliability and unbiased. So you'll get Reuters, you'll get AP, there's just a handful. And then you'll have MSNBC down here a little, you'll have Wall Street Journal on the right a little bit, and then you get all of the bottom feeders. And there, you can just recognize the source. When Joe was talking about watching out for the source, I found this a long time ago, and I just use it regularly when I see something come up that it just doesn't sound right. What is it? Media bias chart, and it'll pop up. Joe, I would like to ask you, what is the most effective way to communicate to our congressmen, senators, presidents, state representatives that we want action on securing our elections?
Face-to-face is the best communication, but you're not going to get them to sit down and talk to you. That's not going to happen.
No.
Which is why I write letters to the editor. Because I know, because Whitman's people have responded to at least one of my letters.
Mm-hmm.
I know they read those. My choice is letters to the editor. And I also send emails and letters to Whitman's office, and I call his local offices and talk to them, but I doubt that anything ever gets up to them. I don't know, Lori. I use letters to the editor and letters and messages to the members of Congress.
Go ahead.
As we've seen in Brexit, the first past the post system that we have in England and in America effectively means that if you don't vote, you've given a vote to the minority
Mm-hmm.
that will win the election.
Yeah.
So it's a fact of life that we've got to encourage everybody
Yeah.
to get out and vote.
Yeah.
Because past the post. And in Britain, with the Brexit Party, what you've seen is that 26% of the electorate have now the ability to turn over the whole of the United Kingdom, drag them out of Europe against the majority's wishes, because half the people didn't want to vote.
Yeah. As Bob will tell you, this state is gerrymandered, okay? And so if you're going against the system, you're already at a disadvantage. So vote turnout is imperative. Yes, back there.
I want to go back to the brain of Putin for just a second.
The brain of Putin.
Why is it that Putin believes, if he does, that disrupting American elections in favor of Republicans is going to be better for him than the Democrats?
Well.
Well, there's the 3.2 million that went to Mitch McDonald.
Well,
So part of that is that, is he doing that, is there a deliberate, is it?
Yeah.
Yes, it's deliberate.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the way some things work. We're all familiar with the James Bond movies and the espionage stories where somebody steals the secrets. Those are known as active agents. Somebody goes out here and steals the secrets and passes it on to you. Active agents who steal the secrets and the code books and the plans for the rockets and all that stuff are very important. The most important agents are what we call agents of influence. You might do like this family did down here in Norfolk and sell me the code books for the Atlantic Fleet. We can change those codes in a minute. But if I can change the minds of people, I have won the war for a generation. And that's what the Russia, and we do the same thing. Mr. Trump is an agent of influence. He has deep ties to the Russian mobsters who operate out of Brighton Beach in New Jersey.
You got it.
They picked him out years and years ago. They realized that the man was bankrupt and that he needed assistance. And so they helped him build his Soho Tower. His golf courses in Scotland and Ireland are going broke, but they're kept afloat by memberships and now by the Air Force, but they're kept afloat by memberships and income from very wealthy Russians. Deutsche Bank, the main bank in Germany, has a special branch that handles only special customers. He's one of their customers. That branch of Deutsche Bank has been indicted in the United States and in, I believe, Great Britain for money laundering, because you've got money floating around Russia. The Russians who make this money have got to get it out of the country somewhere, and they found that one of the best investments in the world is real estate in the United States. And so the Trump Tower, where he lives, almost half of the apartments in that tower were sold to Russians or to anonymous LLCs, limited liability corporations. And they have spotted him a long, long time ago. And you read about this trip.
Wait a minute. A long, long time ago, why hasn't the Democratic Party done something about that?
Well, the facts are all out there. There are a dozen books out there that outline every single connection between Russia, the Russian mob, between Putin, between Russian intelligence.
It didn't come up in the election.
But it seems to me that somewhere along the line, the Putin ensemble have made a decision that the Republicans are more susceptible to Donald Trump than the Democrats.
Let me take a stab at that.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was no friend of the Russians.
Okay. Yeah. Let me take a stab at that, and I don't mean to sound glib. Okay. You go back to in Putin's mind. You go back to Putin's experience. He was a KGB case officer. Okay. His job was to recruit people to commit espionage and do things like you want. Okay, so this is the mentality he has going in. All right. There are several kinds of sources you can use. A lot are just casual sources, people you know who will provide information that's good, and you kind of just keep in touch with them. Other people that are known as controlled assets. Okay, you get levers on them. You know, you get them for things like greed, money, indebtedness, alcoholism, drug addiction, sex, things like that, okay? This is the way you get levers on. Part of the process of recruiting an agent is spotting and assessing, okay? Keep in mind of Putin. They've been doing a lot of spotting and assessing. They've been doing a lot of spotting and assessing, and they probably have. I don't know if Trump is a controlled asset, but boy, there are levers. There are levers they could have on him if they wanted. Now, it wasn't Lewandowski, but it was somebody else that NSA was listening in. It's all in the press now. NSA was listening in on a couple of Russian case officers talking about this guy. Let's say it was Lewandowski. And they were cracking jokes saying this guy's such a moron. And they're coined the term, which falls in between a casual informant and a recruited asset, useful idiot. Now, here's where the glib part comes in, okay? Probably the Republicans now, at this time, have a lot of useful idiots. And that's why they go after them. Yes.
It just seems to me that you're kind of dancing around the edges of the word that starts with a C, and the word is corruption.
Oh, that?
And it sounds to me
Yeah.
as if we are having a problem admitting or allowing the fact that in America we have corruption in our political system.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to go about getting that out there, because we have a great press and people try, but it doesn't seem to. The one other thing that I really feel strongly about is that person-to-person communications really do matter. And I listen to my middle-aged children, whom I think are not as astute as we were taught to be, simply because of the Cold War. I think you have to talk to your children, and you have to point out specifics to them. For example, what's going on right now with, and I've just lost the name of the FBI guy that's in all the,
McCabe.
Yes. Point out what's happening to him. This was his job.
Yeah.
He would have lost his job from within the agency if he had not done his job. His job was to investigate. And the president is illustrating what I would call corruption. And this is how democracy defeats itself. If people don't stand up and say to the people to whom they can say it, this is, I could say it to my kids, Patrick, Brian, look at this. This is not the American way. I know you may be this person, you may like them, you may like that political party, but this president is behaving in a corrupt manner. You've got to get that across one-on-one.
To what Joe touched on, if you were going to get a lever on Trump, okay? No, you're right. There's two things they could get him on right away. Tax evasion, which is what they got Al Capone on, and money laundering. The guy's up to his eyebrows in it, okay?
But they don't, but you have to
But
connect the dots.
how much is the American public willing to take until they say enough? You know?
It's like a Jim Jones effect is how I describe it to people. It's a Jim Jones effect. Republicans that have drank the whole Kool-Aid, it doesn't matter what, he said it himself, he could kill somebody and get away with it. Then you have the Republicans that have sipped the Kool-Aid, which we're hoping we can sway a little bit, like by now you've got to have noticed there's some serious issues here, in hopes to move them along. But the ones that have that have drank the Kool-Aid, period, it doesn't matter what happens, they're going to go blindly into that.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I want to know, with your presentation today, and what is the one thing, the most important thing you want me to leave here with? What knowledge you want to have passed on today? I mean, I know I need to vote. I know I need to vote. I've always known that.
I think the most important thing is, yes, vote. Stay informed with facts and talk to your friends and neighbors about facts.
Don't be afraid to speak out. Don't be afraid to talk to people. And remember what Mr. Jefferson said, democracy cannot flourish without an informed electorate.
Okay, with that, I've got to go. Thank you all.
Okay. Well, thank you. Okay.
In the back.
The whole purpose of this presentation was not just to cheer up the Democratic base.
I know.
It was to provide us with information to talk with our Republican friends and to communicate effectively with our Republican friends, because
Good point.
they're the ones who are going to make a difference. We already know, Democrats already know what they're going to do. We need to be able to communicate with solid information to our Republican friends.
Yes.
Quick follow-up on the lady's question about why Putin pushing on the GOP side. Could it be so simple that if you look at the issues that the party favors, that the Republican buttons are easier to push?
The what?
The Republican buttons are easier to push. Well, I mean, simply,
They looked around for someone they could control.
Yeah.
They found this man who is now the president. They
They-
didn't need to push any buttons. His buttons were already pushed.
Let me just, no,
better, Sam.
it's not just Putin. Okay. Okay. The Russians and the Chinese have for years been studying us from a sociological, anthropological, however you want to think. They've been studying us for a long time. And like, go back to the Gerasimov doctrine. You know, Joe found it curious that the GRU was running this when, in the old Soviet days, it should have been the KGB. It's because of the Gerasimov doctrine. And it is now shifting the emphasis to psychological kind of things. And technology has just aided. Technology was a gift dropped in their laps for their assessments and everything.
Do you think that the Senate, they had a briefing where Mark Zuckerberg was trying to brief Congress,
Mhm.
the Senate. And these gentlemen sat there, and you could see when he was talking about Facebook and the internet, it was just going completely over their heads. They
Yeah.
just did not understand what the internet was.
Yeah.
They didn't understand how Facebook worked. They didn't understand Twitter. They didn't understand anything.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, if you don't understand it, how can you introduce legislation?
Exactly.
that's going to help the
Well,
situation that we find ourselves?
one would hope perhaps maybe they have some enlightened staffers. One would hope, but not necessarily. Yeah.
I think he may have somewhat of a point,
Mhm.
because I think if you look at Congress, and especially the House and Republicans, their congressmen tend to follow the party line, you know, and
Mhm.
regiment and
Yeah.
stand. And we're like herding cats.
Exactly.
So maybe
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why.
Well, okay, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. I've told some people before, I'm an Eisenhower Republican who is a Warren Buffett capitalist who is a Barack Obama Democrat. That's me, okay? What were you saying? See your moment.
It's easier to agree, you know, we're all over the place. And so
Yeah,
it is
okay.
harder to push.
What comes to mind, if you looked, speaking as an independent, if you looked at the way the Republican Party became regimented as a result of the people who brought Ronald Reagan to power, okay, they have maintained that regimentation and discipline. During Bush-Cheney, they became very regimented and disciplined, okay? The Democrats, on the other hand, Will Rogers. You know, I'm not a member of any political organization. I'm a Democrat, you know, okay? There are characters, and the Republican Party is so regimented that Mitch McConnell controls the Senate, you know, okay? Nothing's going to get through there. What is it Mitch McConnell said the other day? I'm not going to let anything on the Senate floor for a vote unless I know the president's going to sign it. Come on. This is not a democracy. Yes, ma'am.
I tell my Republican friends, now whether it does any good or not, I'm not sure, but they do not have a party right now. They have a cult.
Well.
And if you want to support that, then go ahead.
Yeah.
Otherwise, think about it. Please think about someone else, such as the Democrats. And I hope you get your party back one day. We really need two parties.
Mhm.
But I want it back like it used to be.
Yeah.
Way back, there used to be a Republican Party that was a party. We worked together.
Yeah.
But not what we have now.
Yeah.
And then I leave. Now, whether they think about the cult
Yeah.
part, and you don't have a
Yeah.
party right now, what are you doing?
Yeah. The whole crux that I would say of what Joe and I have tried to present to you this afternoon is democracy is under severe challenge, okay? And it's time now for the average person to get maybe a little more better informed and not to be afraid to speak out, okay? That's why we're doing this here.
Speak out differently.
Did you speak out even if you're afraid?
Why are the Democrats so weak, is what I want to know. So they're not speaking out. No, I'm serious.
That's not the purpose of this.
Closing.